This year's Wisdom of the Elders at SERFA, my favorite hour and 15 minutes of the year. So I appreciate all of you being here. I appreciate this year's class of elders, starting on the far end with Ron Olesko. In the middle, you might realize that's not Sheila K. Adams, but Andy Cohen. And Carol Rifkin over here beside me. So as always, we're going to have a fun conversation that I hope turns illuminating in some aspects as well. But let's start off as usual by asking each elder to briefly identify themselves, where they're from, and what they do in the music. So we'll start with you, Ron.
Well, okay. I am Ron Olesko, and I'm from New Jersey. Not exactly a southern state, but I'm really happy to be here. I've been doing folk radio technically since 1980, although I've been with WFUFM since 1975. We're a station in northern New Jersey. And over the years, I've had some wonderful guests, including Andy on my show. And in 2019, because of some situation with my day job, I took an early retirement and started folkmusicnotebook.com, which is a 24/7 internet channel. And I'm also involved with the Hurdy-Gurdy Folk Music Club in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. And I can rotate tires and clean windows, so I'm available. But folk music's always been part of my life since I was a kid. I remember growing up during the folk revival, listening to Captain Kangaroo, who had puppets and such doing all the songs of the day, so it's always been part of me, and I was lucky to be able to combine it with radio. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Ron. How about you, Carol?
Oh, we're going to go down the road. I live in Benton Creek, North Carolina, which is south of Asheville by the National Forest. I have a dog named Bud that I run with. I like to kayak. But I was in the Greengrass Cloggers when I was young on the original road team that went out and about, and we had a really big time. But I also played in lots of bands and went to lots of contests. And I was telling Art, I was living in a little cabin in Henderson County and that belonged to this woman named Elizabeth Donaldson. And in her little cabin were local pottery and some books, some locally written books. And one of them was a man named Frank Fitzsimmons, who wrote for the newspaper, played the banjo, was a really big outdoorsman, and he had a radio show. And I just was so taken with the things that he did. And there was another book by a man named John Paris, who was north of Asheville, and he was a newspaper columnist and similar kind of things and I just was fascinated with that. And I sort of did that. I mean, I play, I dance, I sing. I became a columnist for the Asheville Citizen-Times. I wrote for Gannett, and my byline was Carol Rifkin writes about Appalachian culture for the Asheville Citizen-Times, and I did actually get John Parrish's byline before I left. I did that for more than 20 years, and I do radio. I have a mountain music show on WNCW on public radio called This Old Porch. I've been there for 16 years. I did some stuff, so I'm really good at all the ways it's hard to earn a living.
That unites most of us in this room, I think. How about you, Andy?
I am creeping up on 77 years old. I was born in Dorchester, Massachusetts, spent the first 18 years of my life in a little town outside of Boston called Sharon. And then when I came of age during the early 60s folk revival. And not only that, because my pop was a labor lawyer, a union lawyer, he negotiated contracts for the meat packers and people like that. He was a lefty, I'm a lefty, and I grew up with, in total respect of working class culture. Working class music, working class art, working class everything. And it was kind of organized. For instance, when my mom and pop during the 30s went to one of these, they call them commie camps now. They were progressive organizations would establish a summer camp somewhere. The one they went to was Camp Nishkadaigat, which means what? Me worry. Where the music director was the guy who was the music director for the Almanac Singers, Millard Lampell, and the guy that gave you the canoe on the waterfront was Harry Belafonte. then studying acting and singing in New York. This was his summer gig. This is how he got through. He worked, and I'm very, I'm really happy to have been born into this kind of history. There was a folk revival in the 30s that my parents participated in, just like Pete Seeger, participated in it. And then, so when the 60s came along, I was already ready. I grew up on Dixieland music and boogie woogie and all that stuff. So I didn't even like rock and roll. I just went for the acoustic music. Big Bill Bernsey is my key, my hero.
Very good. Ron, you were on radio for like 5 years before you became a folk radio host. And whenever I think about college radio at Chapel Hill back in the day, the radio station played through the electrical system in the dorms. It was a powerful station. And this cat who would eventually call himself Rick Dees was sitting there doing his show. He had the same mentor as DJ that I did, but guy came into the studio there and said, "Hi, my name's James Taylor. I just got signed to Apple Records and my dad's dean of the medical school." And Rick Dees laughed him out of the studio. "You ought to be a stand-up comedian. That's the funniest thing I've heard in days." How did you make that transition from being a college radio host to now being a folk radio programmer for more than 40 years?
Well, as I said before, I kind of grew up. I was a little kid during the folk revival, so I didn't get to hang out in the clubs or anything like that. But, we sang the songs in school, so it was always part of me. And I always had a thing. My dad was always listened to the radio. I mean, he listened to everything. And it kind of turned me on to radio. So when I decided to go to college, the very first day of my freshman year, I joined the radio station. And originally I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be doing the news on the station, and somehow I got corralled into doing an overnight radio show, which was alternative, progressive music, rock at the time. But I would always start to sneak in some folk music. And one year, the Woody Guthrie movie, Bound for Glory, came out. And I had heard Marjorie Guthrie was active in New York City, running the Woody Guthrie Foundation and the Committee to Combat Huntington's Disease. So I contacted her. I said, "I'd like to do an interview with you." And she graciously came to our studio. She brought a gentleman named Tom Taylor, who was doing a one-man play as Woody Guthrie. The station director at the time was like flabbergasted because he didn't know. We never had guests with playing music on the station. And I did this special with her, and it got a great response. And so I started putting more and more folk music. Well, to move forward a little bit, I graduated to college, and we had a new station director who loved roots music. And he was starting a format which he called Music America, which was a blend of everything. And he asked me, he goes, "You like folk music, how about sticking around to do a show on Sundays?" Well, I didn't have a job yet. So I said, "Okay, I'll do a show on Sunday afternoons for a couple hours until I get a job." I did get a job, but I'm still there. And, it's kind of grown. I've got to meet so many people and watch the music and radio evolve over the years. So it's just something that's kind of grown organically by being part of the community.
And how did the idea for Folk Music Notebook come to you?
Okay. I could see how radio's been changing over the years, and with the internet and with people having shows archived, it became harder for, it's becoming harder for regular terrestrial radio folk shows to maintain that audience. People don't listen by appointment anymore. They'll tune in whenever they can, for a lot of the audience. And I started seeing, folk shows. All right, I'm going to be 66 in a month, so I guess I'm the youngest elder here. but I could see that I'm one of the youngest folk DJs that are still doing these programs. And
I'm not 70 yet.
No. Okay, good.
I'm under 70, just so you know.
But it's getting harder to have the music out there. So I felt there really needed to be something where there was a service that could offer music 24/7. And the circumstances I was working at, my day job was in television production, and the company I worked for decided to close its doors. My wife and I sat down. I was, 62 or 63 at the time. And I knew it was gonna be hard finding another job in television. And she said, look, why don't you do this, do something else? And I had this idea for this radio channel. So I said, let me do it. And I've devoted myself full time to it. It's not a paying job. I'm just trying to keep the channel self-sustaining and pay the bills so we can pay the music publishers and all the tech fees. But it's just been something that I felt there was a need for, and so far it's been pretty successful. We just celebrated our 4th anniversary, and fingers crossed we'll be around for 5 and more.
How did you come to have a show on WNCW? And for those of you who are not local, WNCW you can hear here at 88.7, but it blankets all of western North Carolina, parts of northeastern Tennessee, and the upland of South Carolina. So it covers a vast area. Kind of WUNC and WNCW kind of divide North Carolina between the two of them. But how did you end up on WNCW on Sunday afternoons?
Joe Kendrick, who's now the station manager at WNCW, came up with the idea for a show called What It Is on public radio. And it's basically a show where people argue the different sides of an idea in music. And he decided he wanted to have people who were as far apart in their musical realms on that show. So he had like Fred Blurt from Blurt Magazine, the rocker. Fred was on it. He was my favorite, I think. It was like there was somebody from rock, there was someone, a lot of people, most of us had been in music and journalism, but I was kind of the hillbilly that was in there to say, what? Kind of. It was great. People loved it. It was on for 5 minutes every day. We'd go down and record them in segments, and I had never laughed so much in my life. I loved arguing with them. It was great. And I learned a lot. And people were just taken back that we would argue about something that was a given or whatever. So anyway, I made that a long story. But while I was down there, they said, hey, you're really good on the radio. Do you want a radio show? I said, well, I don't know anything about radio. And they said, that's okay, we'll teach you. And I started out there was a really famous DJ there named Dennis Jones who did the Bluegrass Show. And I started out working with him in training. It was too much like work. I lasted a year doing that one. I said, this is kind of too much for me. They said, well, how would you like the Mountain Music Show? And I said, that's me, so I'm still doing it.
You also are coordinating the JAM program in Henderson County and thus working with young people. Ron was talking about how the age of folk DJs a minute ago. Do the young musicians you work with in JAM listen to the radio?
They listen to specialty shows. They don't turn on the radio. They stream it. When their parents allow them. About 6 years ago, a philanthropist called me and said, which was a big surprise, he knew a friend of mine from Henderson County and said, I want to start a nonprofit in Henderson County to bring the music back. And I said, what are you talking about? There's so much music in Henderson County. But he was kind of right that the people that I knew that were really important were gone. Arlene Kesterson was the center of the universe, and she had passed away, and the teams were all being claimed by Asheville. It went from being the center of music and dance to having very little. It was real scattered when the leadership passed away. So we started a nonprofit called the French Broad Valley Music Association, and I started jam sessions out there with plays. So I still play every Wednesday night out there. Anybody can come. I use Ms. Hyatt's rules, which would be nice or leave. We take turns. The other sessions aren't like that, but the old mountain sessions, you had to take turns and be polite, and you had to try and play. It forces you out of your comfort zone, and you learn things you might not know. And my commitment had been for a while to learn the music that was here, because what I've really noticed is that there's this homogenization of mountain music going on, where people know Tommy Gerald. He was really famous and wonderful, and I worked with him, but he had a unique style, and they played that in Round Peak, and that's the most popular, but they didn't play that here. They didn't play like that at all. They played like in East Tennessee. The higher mountains had ballads, and they had clogging teams, and they had East Tennessee longbow. So I kind of started over, and I learned that from a man named Arvel Freeman, who passed away last year, and wound up playing with him for like 30 years. But that's pretty much been my mandate. On Wednesday night, we play those tunes, and some people come and say, oh, you play all that old stuff, but that's okay. You sit, if you're not good, you don't sit in the middle. You sit around the outside, and you're polite and don't play loud. But it's been wonderful, and the world has really changed. Asheville was like Mecca for young people, but young people can't afford to live there now. And they're in Hendersonville. They're in Henderson County and Brevard, and in the surrounding Marshall and the surrounding counties. There's all these really wonderful music things going on in Marshall and with young people, but they're not quite as much in Asheville because they can't afford to live there. So, and then we started a jam program, which was hard because COVID kind of really got in the way of that, but it also is good in that we bonded a lot over let's get to play. But I have 22 kids ranging in age from 7 to 13 is my oldest. I think he just turned 13. And if you know me, I'll suck you into coming and helping the kids. Andy came and played for the kids all day. They're awesome. I have like 15 little girls playing fiddle. It's awesome. Some guitar players, and then I have a banjo teacher who comes and does that. We stopped doing dance because of COVID. We could still sit 6 feet away and play outside, but dance was kind of out, and I'd like to put that back in. And it's been a really hard road financially to raise the money to keep the program going. It's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I've never had to raise the money before to keep doing what you want to do. But it's pretty great, really, and it's really growing. And Henderson County's really gotten behind us in support. So that's that.
Yeah, back in the mid-1980s, I had a job in Nashville working in radio and TV, but they never paid me regularly enough to move up here. So I commuted back and forth and slept in the office. But in those days...
you had a bunch of jobs that brought you that.
Yeah. Don Petty was trying so hard to get the Asheville Junction alive again, and folks were all filled with nostalgia for the Asheville Junction. And I didn't know anything about that because I just come up here to work for Fire on the Mountain and the Liberty Flyer.
I loved those, though. I loved Art was really involved with some wonderful projects.
Yeah, and I'm glad the Cloggers had an office or someplace to escape my office in Lawson to go hang out with y'all on Wall Street. Yeah, Cloggers with an office on Wall Street. We just won't mention those Wall Street.
It was past my time, but yeah.
Andy, tell us about when you came to Asheville and about starting the Asheville Junction.
In 1970, I was involved in a musicians co-op in Saratoga Springs called Wildflowers. and a number of fairly famous, now famous, folk musicians were members. John Robertson, Tony Barron, Margaret MacArthur, Rosalie Sorrells, Utah Phillips, and a bunch of people you never heard of, Bob White, Alan Stoll, myself, my buddy Rat, and a number of other people. Al McKinney was our kind of all-around road manager. And for about a year and a half, we clung to each other, trying to make a living playing music. And we had this one portable folk festival we did over in Vermont, and we got paid with a rubber check. And that broke us up. And we scattered to the four winds. Bill Vanover was then living in, we were living in different places. Wherever we were, we organized something, okay? We was scattering to the four winds. Rat went out to Seattle and became a shipwright. Bill Vanover became a dance instructor in all kinds of Asian lands, and Jack McGann started the Cherry Tree Co-op. My then wife Iris wanted to go back to graduate school, and she got accepted at Mankato and at Cullowhee. And she said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "They got snow in Mankato, they got fiddles in Cullowhee. Let's go to Cullowhee." So she got her couple of degrees from Cullowhee, and then we moved into Asheville, and I was looking for something to do. And I heard about this preacher who'd come in from Alaska named Dick Gilbert to take over what had been an African-American girls' school under segregation called the Allen School. It became the Allen Center, all kinds of community organizations started there, and he wanted to have a coffee house. So he said, "I'll tell you what, you get my gym painted for me, and I'll buy you a sound system and back you until we know whether it's gonna go or not." So I organized a bunch of folkies, and we painted the gym, and he bought us a sound system, and Asheville Junction began. Now, there's a peculiar thing about Asheville. One of its major exports is banjo and fiddle music. But in Morgantown, there was Etta Baker and her whole family. And in Kingston, and Leslie Riddle, and that's where Ronnie McGee grew up. And Reverend Davis came from near Greenville, and Ted Bogan and Pink Anderson and Simmy Dooley were in Spartanburg. Why wasn't there any blues in Asheville? I found out there was. It was just hidden under everything else. I went down on the corner, right down the street from the Allen Center. There's the corner of Eagle and Valley. If you ever read any of the Thomas Wolfe books, that's where Gene Gant goes to get his jelly roll, that neighborhood. And I started asking people my sneaky folklorist question, you remember that old guy that used to play blues around here? Somebody, yeah, that's Walt Phelps, and he's over there at May's place playing the numbers and having a beer. And so I knocked on the door, and I found him, and I brought him up to the junction. The junction was the only place in town that paid musicians. All the bars paid the musicians in beer. And we paid $50 a night in 1974.
Wasn't it dry still?
Setups.
Oh,
No, actually,
right.
no, you
Brown
could get
bag.
beer.
You could brown bag, really?
Yeah, there was lots of bars there. Bars all over the place. As many bars as there were churches. And, they sort of functioned in the same way. Taverna and tabernacle have the same etymological root. what my purpose was in starting the junction was to give the locals a place to exhibit their many, many skills. Don Petty, Wayne Erbson, Andy Lally,
I still see Andy.
Tim, the Abel brothers, they were all playing around town, mostly for nothing. And we were able to give them a place to play where they could build a following in a non-alcoholic setting and get paid. The major accomplishment of Asheville Junction was that because we were paying people, the bars had to too. And I was very happy about that. I was also happy that I ran the only integrated club in the city. We had, my very first act was Bessie Jones.
Oh,
Yeah, very first one. And she came and she completely charmed the 200 kids that were in the daycare center. I had Dan Smith, I had Walt and Ethel, Johnny Shines. I was able to present at one point The Boys of the Law. So I felt pretty good about running the junction. And, you know, once our baby was born, Maura, who is now on the edge of menopause. We're talking 50 years ago here. I've known all these people. I mean, I'm 77 years old. I've known all these people for most of my life. I've known many of you for most of my life. And I managed to get away with just picking a guitar to make money with it. At one point, we had to go back up north. We went to Ohio so that we could be in between the grandparents. And I got drafted to run the Kent State Folk Festival there. And that's how I got my fabulous education. I got to go to grad school for 10 years.
That's why you were at Kent State. I don't think any of us knew why you were there.
That's book learning, that's not wisdom.
It was great because he hired us all to go. I mean, would the Quirklickers have been at Kent State as Quirks?
Oh, I've heard about Asheville Junction. Tell us about the Hurdy-Gurdy Folk Club, Ron.
What's that?
Well,
Oh, that's Ron.
the Hurdy-Gurdy is a club in a venue in
Oh,
New Jersey.
did you start that?
I didn't start it. I was there at the beginning. I was doing my radio show, and a group of folkies in the area started this little club because there was nothing in Bergen County, which is where I'm located. So they started the Hurdy-Gurdy in 1981, and I was already on the air doing the folk show, so they contacted me, and I emceed a few of their shows. But it's a venue that's been going, as I said, since '81. We do a concert once a month. Over the years, it's been really a who's who of artists that have been there. Back around 2000, they kind of corralled me into doing their booking, and we had to move to a new venue, and the president decided they didn't want to have any part of moving. So suddenly I became president, and I'm still president of it today. But we've been struggling since the pandemic, as most venues have been in the area. But we try to model ourselves after a lot of other folk clubs, you know, bringing in name acts, touring artists, and also coupling them with the young singer-songwriters in our area as openers and sometimes co-bills. You know, being in the New York area, you know, the Greenwich Village folk scene has always been a part of it. I was also peripherally involved with Speakeasy during the early days in Fast Folk, you know, having a lot of the guests come on, Suzanne Vega, John Gorka, Jack Hardy, and so many others, Christine Lavin. And so we're kind of more singer-songwriter oriented, I would say, in the New York area, which I know we could get into a whole other discussion of what traditional music and folk music is. But that's kind of the way that hurdy-gurdy kind of evolved as well. We do try to mix it up, just like I do on Folk Music Notebook, with more diverse styles of music, from traditional to contemporary. One of the nice things about our area is that I think it is a very diverse area, and I think we're seeing that more and more as time goes on. I mean, when you think back on the folk revival of the 60s, some of the big names were mainly white guys. There was fewer women, fewer people of color. You could probably name them on the hands, some of the other areas, but now it's, I think, opened up more. And we've tried to reflect that at the hurdy-gurdy, trying to bring in new artists. But, again, with an older crowd sometimes, it gets hard to get them to come in and pay money for a ticket for somebody they don't know. Being in the New York area, there's so much competition, not just folk clubs, but other activities. So that's something else that we've been struggling with, but we're doing our best to keep it going.
Very good. And while we're on the topic of presenting, Carol has been involved since the beginning and got at the 50th festival last fall, got the ceremonial robe to acknowledge it with the Lake Eden Arts Festival, which takes place on the north side of the highway at the second campus of Black Mountain College. This was the original campus here up in Robert E. Lee Hall, and then it moved to its own campus up at Lake Eden. But tell us about LEAF.
It's next weekend. There's a big one in the fall still, and COVID, of course, has changed the face of the festival business. But gosh, that was a long time ago. Jennifer's brother came to me and said, my sister wants to start, I had taught his kids music, and my sister wants to start a festival, and we need someone in the music industry. We want it to be somebody we know. So that was, we just got along, and she wanted to buy, there was a festival here called the Black Mountain Festival that had had a bunch of difficulties. So we tried to buy that, and we kept trying to buy that, and it just didn't work out. And she looked at me one day and said, well, we could just start our own, couldn't we? Couldn't you do that? We could just start one. And we said, oh, sure. It's like, two women starting a folk festival in the middle of, but it was great, and it's still going. I produced 22 festivals. I guess I stayed for 12 years. But it was too hard for me to play and do other things I wanted to do. But I mean, I'm really proud of it, and she's my sister from another mother. I'll be there next weekend. I always go and play, and during COVID, we started walking around the lake together outside again and talking about where do we go, where could this go now, and how will we survive music and all that. She's managed to adapt, the festival's still, she does a smaller camp instead of two huge ones, she's doing a smaller camp. But the festival was so successful, when the city festival went under, LEAF became the downtown festival. But anyway, it was fun. I'm glad I did it.
What makes LEAF special?
I think anything goes there. People really feel like as long as you don't harm anyone else, you can do whatever you want there. And if you ran around naked, no one would care if you didn't hurt them or expose yourself to children or whatever. But it's always been like open to anything, and our visions were a little different. I liked roots music. I have this thing that there's only so many ways you can move your body. If you're in a folk culture, if you think about it, it's going to have strings and or you're going to hit something on it, or you're going to move your body. So, going to different dance things and meeting Chuck, and the first great African dance company was in Chuck, what was his name? Great dancer.
Chuck Davis?
Yeah, Chuck Davis. We went and took that and said, hey, would you come to LEAF? I just wanted to put all the different types of music together. We'd have Louisiana music next to Canadian step dancers, next to, in an intimate setting where people could talk to him because we were limited to like 6,000 or 7,000 people on site. And it worked really well. She's more committed to third world music and goes back and forth with that. Her theme this time is African. She's got a great educational program going to South America and to Africa. So we're still kind of on the same path, but they go back and forth.
My first day on the job at the Art Center in Carver, I walk in there, there's Chuck Davis sitting in the lobby, and I hadn't seen him in 7 or 8 years. He passed away, I guess, 4 years ago.
Yeah, he was wonderful.
I go, but what are you doing here, Chuck? Well, one of your instructors for this kid's class was sick and called me and asked to substitute. That was a pretty good substitute there, the African dance class. Tell us a little bit about how the cloggers migrated up here.
It had started in Greenville at the university, and it was a club. It had been a club.
North Carolina.
Yeah, Greenville, North Carolina. There was a good music community there, but it was a huge club. And when they started getting invited to do things like big festivals, it was great fun, but it was pretty hard to maintain and control in terms of getting, all those people off and around. And so they split into two groups. They had the people who didn't travel, and then they created a professional team that would be on the road and come back, so we'd go back. But we were hardly ever there, and it was really hard to get places from Greenville. There wasn't a good airport near there, and we all wanted to be in the mountains. And we just said, just kind of like starting leave, let's move to the mountains. Let's buy a bus. We went and bought a bus from this, on the way to the mountains, we went and buy this bus. We had borrowed money, and we bought a bus from a gospel group in Hickory. And we didn't know a lot about buses. We'd had a school bus, but the guy, we knew we were in trouble. The guy, we gave him the check, he kissed it and said, "Hallelujah," and ran out of the room. and we broke down like in Old Fort. We only made it from like Hickory to Old Fort, we just like 20 miles or something, but it was an adventure. It was a little bit like the Muppets, or kind of making it. So some people made it to the mountains and some people didn't, and they talk about it, we moved here to them, but in reality it was kind of a slow trickle of who had a place to live and where you could be. And I never made it past Henderson County, but I could get to the bus, and we found a bus mechanic, Mr. Lyda, in downtown Asheville, who could keep the bus running. So.
Well, y'all were a bunch of inexperienced hippies. You would have thought in 1962,
Clueless.
23 years after joining the Grand Ole Opry, Bill Monroe would have known better, but he bought a bus off Johnny and Jack. And they take off from a trip, Nashville, Miami, Los Angeles. In the bus he just bought off Johnny and Jack. And they get on the road and discovered that the waste treatment system hadn't functioned in several years. It hadn't even been cleaned out in several years. And here they're all going on a 6,000-mile bus trip. So a lot of folks have made bus buying decisions that weren't too good.
I don't think we ever even had a waste system on the bus. But we did chart our trips by where we broke down. Although I remember the Dalles, Oregon, after going all the way across the country, we broke down in the Dalles, Oregon, there's really nothing there. People were so nice to us when we'd break down. There had been a shoe factory that was closed down, and some of my favorite dent shoes came from there, but the best people we met were often, when we broke down, we'd have no money, we'd be stuck somewhere, and people would feed us and say, my brother's a mechanic, or, if you can pay for the parts, but, we lived on $75 a week. We had a draw, and we'd take the pay and put it in and live on a draw until I lived on $75 a week for a long time, and had a lot of fun. So.
Andy, Do you feel that your academic chops, and you have more of those than most folks even in this business, which is full of ABDs, but do you feel how do you feel your academic background in anthropology and archaeology has shaped your approach to the music?
It gave me a place to stand and look at the whole thing at once. When we do gigs, we are tracing a route. Each of us is tracing an individual route through an existential situation that has concrete limits, and you do what you do what you have to do to get there, get the gig, get to the gig, get over at the gig, and get on to the next one. But you are also encased, you are embedded, perforce, in a whole society, a piece of which is the folk world. Okay? In our contacts, what we try to do at places like SERFA is maximize the commodifiability of our profession. But what anthropology teaches me is how to suss out the origins, the impulses that cause people to become fiddle players and banjo players, and to embrace the music, all of the non-economic values. I am hardly at all interested in the economic processes that I have to participate in order to make a living. I'm much more interested in why we love this stuff. That's the real motivation. The economics has very little to do with the folk world. Bob Dylan learned everything that all of us collectively know at the same time. His motivation was to dominate the industry. I just wanted to make 50 bucks a night, every night, forever. That would satisfy me, and it would still satisfy me.
So, how did you go from there to starting a record label in this day and time?
I married the boss. 27 years ago, 28, 30 years ago, Larkin Bryant hired me. I knew her then boyfriend, Dennis Batson. The two of them were involved in starting WEVL in Weevil Radio in Memphis as the community station there. And I'd known Dennis from a previous situation. They broke up, and I broke up with my wife, and I moved to Memphis, and we got together and we played music. We had the same attitude toward the musical origins and what was traditional and what was not traditional. You know, we were older folkies, not songwriters. 99% of what we did was what we learned, what we received from the great folk cloud, and not what we contributed to it. Larkin died a couple of years ago, and I inherited, so I wanted to carry on in the manner that we had been doing all these years. So in the last year, I've gotten 11 under-recorded people recorded, and they'll come out. The CDs will be coming out as they get made. But I just wanted to do something to honor Larkin and continue the exploration of the non-economic value of folk music.
Could I just add something? What you're saying about non-economic, I kind of feel the same way about what I do, because I'm not getting a paycheck for radio ever. But there's something that's important to carry on those traditions, and I love what you said about the anthropologist part. I worry sometimes when I come to conferences, not SERFA, but I've seen artists come in and have no background in what the roots music is. I'll never forget, I was at NERFA once, and this was when Dave Van Ronk was still with us, and he was sick. And they were taking up a collection, and we were at dinner, and someone next to me turns to me and goes, "Who's Dave Van Ronk?" And I realized we got a lot of work to do here, So yeah, I think everything, I'm sorry, I'm just rambling here for a second, but what you said really touched me, and I think that is something that's so important about, getting back to the roots, and there's a place for both singer-songwriters and these traditions, but we need to learn those traditions to become better singer-songwriters, in my opinion.
Bear in mind that the social policies of the last 50 years have blown up the situations in which traditions are forged. The kinds of traditions that we're talking about. Rural traditions, traditions of music, not just music, but cooking and house building and child rearing and all of the other anthropological, those are all traditions too. And in a lot of ways, it's a good thing that a lot of these traditions are no longer in force. Who wants a tradition of segregation? Yeah. Who wants it to, this is the way it's always been, it's got to be this way. Forget that. We're all people. Chimps don't dance. We do. They don't sing. We do. Every human culture has music. Every human culture has dance. Every human culture has traditions. The Industrial Revolution has done a great deal toward breaking up those traditions. So when you see a, quote, folk singer on stage, they are assembling shards, like potsherds, and presenting them to you in a commodified manner, organized by a bunch of volunteers. Thank you very much, all of the people who work for nothing in the folk world, just to see us come and pick. That's that non-economic value. That's how the coffee houses and the festivals get organized, by people volunteering.
Sure do. Carol, how do you put together your radio show? Do you, like my wife, just go on air and play music, or do you come in heavily planned?
Probably somewhere in between that. I have a rolling suitcase. I have this huge suitcase filled with CDs that are digitized albums that they didn't reproduce, and that's my history section. And then I have the new section. I kind of have this little thing in my head. I get a theme, but in every 15 minutes I try and play a start cut, a new cut, a regional cut, and an anything goes cut. As part of my rotation cycle of it. So I try and include everything, but lots of times I just get in there in the library and I'll get on a theme. Fiddlers that do this particular thing, or banjo people that, you kind of get on a roll with it, and it makes it really fun or songs about, New Year's or the holiday or whatever. So yeah, I'm like halfway in between her, maybe. Sort of planned, but sort of not.
How about you, Ron?
Very, very similar. You know, I have two things. I do my radio show Traditions, which is on Sundays from 3 to 6, and that's the one I've been doing on WFDU since 1980. It also is on Folk Music Notebook, and for that one, since the pandemic, I've been pre-recording every week. We weren't allowed to go into the station, so we had to work from home, and I was already doing some of that. But it's kind of like, it just kind of evolves. You know, some of my listeners will send me a request, and then I'll start building sets around that. Or I'll get a new recording that comes in and say, well, where can I take this? And so for that show, that's how that builds. So you know, a 3-hour show will take me probably about 10 to 12 hours each week to put together and record. My wife says I spend way too much time worrying about it, but you know, let me go back and fix this, you know, no. But for Folk Music Notebooks, it's a 24/7, and we do a lot of pre-recorded shows in the evenings, but the bulk of our program is based on our songs. And I found that we have the most listeners during the day and the afternoon, which is kind of traditional with radio, but they seem to prefer just hearing the music. So it's a matter of building the database so that the songs play in an order that'll make sense, yet show all the different styles and keep it interesting for the listener. So it's been challenging, and I've been learning a lot from that. Internet radio and terrestrial radio are basically two different animals, and I'm still in the learning process on that one.
Yeah, we did continue during COVID to work in studio, and it was hard.
Yeah.
It was, you know, between your shift, masks, and you can't really wear masks on the radio, but to trade places, and we'd wipe the seats down and wipe off I remember like cutting off the station, trying to wipe off the thing with Clorox rags. And we'd go, what has she done? You know, we're off air or whatever.
We went through
and
the
then
same thing.
masking the big mic
Yeah.
kind of on there without damaging it. We had these filter things that, it was hard.
Yeah, I went back a couple times when they lifted the orders, but then I found the same thing. You know, I had my own little mic shield, windscreen, but we also, the station, the CD players weren't working because we couldn't afford to get them fixed. I said,
Everything was dirty too. It's all guys.
Yeah.
Oh, it was gross in there.
So it just became easier to, and I do primarily everything off of file base. I have a large database now on hard drives, and I find it much easier doing it that way. The times they are changing.
We use a mix of Audio Vault, and I'm running an Audio Vault on one side and that, you know, the NPR kind of thing on the other, and then I have 3 CD trays that, because in the mountain music, there's still a lot of things that I want to play on CD, but we also have been putting them into an Audio Vault so that we can drop and drag in. But it's a lot, you know, 2 keyboards, lots of things. You know. I make a lot of mistakes.
Radio station is someplace to hang out. It's something I think got totally lost with COVID, at least on the little stations I'm involved with.
We don't let anybody in now at all unless they're, I mean, the doors are locked. We have our it's really sad to have lockdown protocols, and not just for COVID, but for guns and everything. It's just kind of heartbreaking, you know, to look at the list on the wall and say, God, it's just, you know, I'm in a radio show and I have all this going on. But yeah, the public's not, they used to be able to just come in and say hi and wander around, so.
Yeah, one of my favorite radio stories was from KFAT in Gilroy, California. The original Hell Angels, Sonny Berger's people would hang out at that station, and Sonny Berger gets sent to prison, and the Angels come back from the trial all pissed off and descend on KFAT and want the DJ to cheer them up. That guy, that was the scariest show he ever did in his life, making sure he selected one right song after another for his audience there live in the studio. Those days are long gone. And speaking of long gone, I'd like to throw out to each of you about how the work you do keeps this music alive. And do you think obviously Carol's reaching a younger generation in the jam program.
For sure, yeah. They love it. They're sponges. They get enough of it. I think how they perceive it is possibly different. They love that, you know, they don't care what it is, they just like it. They like acoustic music, and I'm pretty wide, you know, if they want to play, they can play whatever they want. To me, mountain music was whatever you wanted to play on a string instrument became mountain music. If it was on a banjo or a fiddle or guitar, that's kind of changed. People really want to define it and narrow it down, but I'm still good with whatever you want to play is fine on mountain instruments. It's a living tradition, and the kids just love it. But I don't put a lot of, you know, it's not real defined what it is.
Yeah, Andy, reaching new generations.
Well, we play music because it makes us feel good and it makes the people around us feel good, right? And, you know, that's a value in itself. But music itself is largely insubstantial. It exists in our mind and exists for a moment when we do it, but then it fades away. All kinds of money, calories, material, venues, and human activity, a lot of human activity goes into the preparation and exhibition of what we do. Even if it's just a little church coffee house somewhere, or even if it's just a house concert, even if it's just going to play at a soup kitchen or playing on the street. All of the best things I learned about how and why to do this music, I learned from blind street singers. You know, guys that didn't have much other choice. My role model was Reverend Gary Davis, and after him, Jim Brewer, who used to play came from Brookhaven, Mississippi in 1940, and he played on Maxwell Street until the day he died on 1988. That's how he made his whole living, his whole life. You know, the education I got from the old guys is a different kind of education than I got from all those books. I got a lot out of the books. I got an orientation out of the books. But I learned how to deal from the old guys.
I think it's a lot about community. I mean, y'all are here as part of a community, but I have found in music, radio, whatever, anything that it's all sort of intertwined. You know, there's this serendipity of people working together. At JAM, you know, when it's really hard to raise money, and I needed a spokesperson, and I was talking to Jim Lauderdale. Said, Jim, you know, I didn't know how hard this was going to be. Like in the next county, they've got the Steep Canyon Rangers doing benefits. I said, and I'm just not important enough. And he said, I'll do it. And he's helped us raise so much money. I mean, he didn't have to do that. He's awesome. No, and it really was hard for him to step out and add more to his plate. But people do. They step up to, you know, if you say you need help and it's reasonable, they generally do in the music community and the arts community.
Our community, Andy hit on something pretty significant to me, is that all of us had choices. To make a living, we didn't have to do this, but we didn't grow up a coal miner in Jenkins, Kentucky, or a blind person in Watauga County, North Carolina, who had very limited choices. We did, but we got led here, and I'm glad we did. Might not show it on the bank statement, but it's been an amazing life. And that has to affect how everybody approaches the music, or what we do within the music community. That we're here by choice. We're not here out of desperation. We're not considering ourselves lucky to split a hot dog and a 5-cent pie.
I had a day job in television, as I mentioned. And I'll be honest, after 40 years, I was tired of it, way tired of it. And doing my radio show was always something that I enjoyed, and because it was part of a community. I didn't feel that in television. I felt people were just, backstabbers trying to get ahead and, trying to make money. But there was a different feel in the folk community, and in radio, the non-commercial radio that I was doing, that kept me going. And then when the opportunity came, that's when I started folk music. But I've never been happier, doing this stuff now, because I'm doing something I love, and part of this community. I mean, being here at SERFA for the first time, meeting so many new people, it really gives me hope for the future. People are always crying, where's the folk music going? Where are the young people? How do we get them involved? Well, damn it, they are getting involved. It's just in a little different ways than the way we're doing it,
Yeah, I mean,
Teaching as fast as I can.
Yeah, and you're doing a great job.
it's definitely the community that attracted me, the people. There's lots of different kinds of music I like.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions from the audience members? Yeah,
They all agree with us.
I'm familiar with it, but Carol, could you maybe just tell them a bit more about the jam? Could you just maybe tell everybody a little bit more about the jam program and exactly what that is?
Yeah, it's the Junior Appalachian Musicians Program, and Helen White started it, who was partner to Wayne Henderson. She had been a friend of Dick Terrier's. I think they both taught in the same school. He was a librarian or something, so I met her in that strange serendipity of all that stuff. And it has grown. There are 56 jam programs now. We were we were the last county in the mountains to get a jam program when I did it. So it's really grown. It's really big in Tennessee. But basically, if a child wants to play, I find an instrument. If they don't have the money, I find somebody to pay their tuition. The session that we do with adults on Wednesday night, we donate that money to the program. I stand up. I mean, it's ridiculous I do this now, but I stand up in the middle of the room and say, I need 3 bows, y'all. Empty your pockets into the tip jar. These kids need, people donate it, but it's an Appalachian music program, and it's different in every county, which is really wonderful. That the idea is that you're supposed to have it reflect where you are. It isn't somebody else's concept. You're supposed to play what people played where you are in any way you want to, and it doesn't matter if it's bluegrass or old time or blues or whatever. It's just getting the kids playing on stringed instruments and playing together, and that's pretty much what it is, yeah.
And are all 56 programs operated completely independently of each other?
Yes, but we do have, you have to use the trademark, you have to be licensed by the main thing, but we are all dependent on ourselves and economic. So Brett Maras took over from Helen, and the main thing that the main jam does for us is she acquires gifts of, like someone would give her 100 tuners. We didn't have any tuners like the first 2 years, which was okay, but I learned to play without tuners. But then somebody made a gift and she distributes them. And also it's kind of a distribution of instruments. She and Jim Lloyd do. If I have 3 quarter-size fiddle and somebody else has 2 halves, we can trade. Or she gives everybody 10 instruments, and after that you swap. If I need a bass or something, I can say, I'll give you this if you give me this. And she kind of gives us a way to network with each other, but we're all completely on our own for the most part, other than that.
How do kids find out about the program?
Gosh, I don't know. Word of mouth, mostly, it seems like. Or they saw you play and they ask, and you say, well, there's a kids program. Or the parents say, my son's been playing guitar and he wants to learn more, and there's it's a little easier for us now because Henderson County has let us use the Parks and Rec building. We used to be, we were in the back of the brewery. We actually have 2 real classrooms now, which is we really appreciate. But we were in the, then we were in an auditorium where we'd have 2 different classes going on at one time, and we'd be like pretending we didn't hear the banjos. And so it's not easy to do, and a lot of them have a lot more money than others. It's just how much your county gets behind it. But Henderson County is really starting to get behind it, so it's good.
Yes, sir.
A question for everybody. What, if anything, have you done to attract new cultures that are coming to the United States into your programs? The Middle Eastern folks, North African folks, Latin American folks. They have their own traditions. That is certainly a focus.
What was the question?
How do we attract other cultures into it that are new cultures, Asian or Latin, or that are in the community, whatever?
Go to the dances, make friends, live in the neighborhood. I mean, you have to reach out. The idea of a folk festival, Bascom Lamar Lunsford transformed the idea of the Asheville Folk Festival by having a contest, but breaking it up into different acts so that people saw a variety show, but the judges could still judge. The Newport people took this idea and used it to put different similar instrumentalists, similar singers on the stage together, ripping away the neighborhood borders. Most of the early recording was done in New York, where the turf lines were very clear. You didn't want to go into an Irish neighborhood if you didn't belong there. Just like if you're a South Sider in Chicago and you want to play a West Side club, you need a sponsor. You can't just go there and walk in and say, give me a gig. And the idea of a folk festival is to strip away all of those borders and let people just interact as they might. It's been successful. Good job, guys.
I think
I would have to say my response to that is that at a higher level of group, I feel like the Arts Council and people have to be responsible for that. I've got my little corner, but at the same time, there's a lot of Hispanic kids, and there's a lot of Hispanics in Henderson County, and I've had a lot of Hispanic kids come through it, because the same GCD that I'm teaching is the same I mean, it's the same. Music is a common language. They can play whatever they want with it, but once they learn it, so I don't really care where they're from. We take them in if they want to do it. It's okay.
Interestingly enough, Jane Addams at Hull House, back before World War I, presented what she called a folk festival, and that was sort of like folk mood out here. Everybody go demonstrate your culture for all the other people here. Very much on that theme, and as far as I know, that was the earliest use of that word, folk, 2 words, folk festival.
There was an introduction I probably should have given, which is that the National Council for Traditional Arts has another model, and it's one that's culture-based. It was responsible for the creation of the Richmond Folk Festival, which is now the largest outdoor program in Virginia. 200,000 people come to Richmond over the course of one weekend. That's almost the population of the city. So there are ways that we, if we open our eyes to things that non-European, I'm European heritage, a lot of us, to bring people who are hungry for their own cultural traditions expressed in the way that we do it, because the way that we do it is intimate. It matters.
Yeah, I think LEAF was based on that same concept, I think, of bringing people from different cultures together. It can never be huge. It has to fit on a camp, which is good too.
The North Carolina Folk Festival is what was left behind from the Greensboro National Folk Festival by NCTA. And if you understand that model, it makes perfect sense, the spots you hear on NCW and UNC for a fundraiser based in many different kinds of ethnic chefs producing the food that they serve. And of course, it's to raise money for the North Carolina Folk Festival. So if you don't know the NCTA model, that probably doesn't make any sense to you at all. But if you do, it makes total sense. We probably have time for one more question, if anyone has one. Yes.
Hi, my name's Chris. I just want to speak to the kind of anthropological aspect. I'm very enamored with that piece as well.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's important to find out. So I'm doing a workshop today too that's looking at that for Southern West Virginia for the coal fields, but it's just, I think it's important to dig back and find out who these folks were and kind of why they do what they do. And folks that we've never heard of. There's so many archives out there, recordings that nobody ever made any money, and that wasn't their goal. But if that resonated with anyone else, we talked about that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, we are heir to the weight of historicity, but we are not bound by it. Let me tell you a little story. I am as sure today of my sort of intellectual position as I was when I formulated it in an instant when I was 17 years old at the Brandeis Folk Festival. Okay, 1,000 Jewish kids wearing yarmulkes, right? And the first act was the Jim Kweskin Jug Band. Great stuff. Everybody loved it. And then the New Lost City Ramblers came on and they showed them some real old-time country music, and then they brought on Roscoe Holcomb, and he knocked them out. Playing, now this is in 1964, when the civil rights movement was at its height, and the kids in Birmingham had been bombed just the year before. So there was a lot going on. There is an implicit fit between civil rights movement kinds of politics and folk music, traditional music, even if the people that play that folk music are very conservative, and a lot of them are. After Roscoe Holcomb, we saw Bessie Jones and the Georgia Sea Island Singers, and they tore it up, and the kids were, they'd never seen anything like that before. And then Reverend Gary Davis came on, and he knocked it right out of the park. And in the middle of his set, the Georgia Sea Island Singers came back, and they had church. And they had church in such a way that those Jewish kids, the yarmulkes were flying off their heads. And in that moment, I knew what I was going to do for the rest of my life. That was a really enlightening moment for me. It set my course. I realized that the culture that these people had forged out of nothing, and the rights that we were all fighting for, we're all part of the same story.
That's a beautiful image to end today's Wisdom of the Elders with, Andy. Thanks so much. Please thank our elders, Ron Olesko, Andy Cohen,